In the staring contest between the Chinese government and Donald J. Trump, with the world's economy hanging in the balance, Donald Trump appears to have blinked first. News breaking today that the U.S. and China are reducing tariffs for 90 days. After talks in Switzerland over the weekend, the Trump administration is now lowering tariffs on Chinese goods to 30% from the rate Trump had set, which was 145%. The Chinese government is lowering tariffs on American products to 10%. Now, that 30% number on goods from China is still higher than what it was before Trump came to town, but it is a significant drawdown from the current rate. News of the reprieve in the trade war started by Trump sent markets soaring. The Dow Jones today closing up more than 1,000 points. Trump called the cut in tariffs a, quote, great reset. His press secretary went further, calling it, quote, an extraordinary first step in the right direction. But let's be clear about what happened here. Donald Trump started a trade war, and Donald Trump blinked in the war he started. New York Times writes it like this, quote, in a research note, Mark Williams, chief Asia economist for Capital Economics, said the agreement was, quote, another substantial retreat from the Trump administration's aggressive stance, because it does not include any commitments by China on its currency or trade imbalances. In other words, Trump got no assurances that China would work to fix the reason Trump imposed the tariffs in the first place. That is, ostensibly, the country's trade deficit with China. Now, Charles Gasparino, he's a reporter over at Fox News, tweeted this, in part, quote, breaking. Trump raised tariffs on the world, the markets, particularly the bond market, which we need to finance our debt. They rebelled. Trump then was forced to back off. End of story. Film at 11 of the president spinning this as a major victory. What we have seen is a little lesson on how markets exert their power. How, when you have to depend on them, as we still do, you can't go to trade war with the world without bad stuff happening, end quote. Again, that was from Fox News. And there is, of course, still uncertainty and more of it ahead, whether the U.S. and China will strike an agreement or whether they won't. And businesses could once again face a tariff rate of 145%. All of that remains to be seen and worked out. Even this temporary relief may cause new problems and have unintended new consequences. New York Times reports this, quote, businesses will likely encounter a flood of pent-up demand, leading to soaring transport prices as companies race to schedule shipments during the 90-day negotiating window to take advantage of the lower tariff rate. The impacts are likely to show up at what has been the front line of Donald Trump's trade war with China, our nation's ports. That is why we start there today with my friend and colleague, NBC News correspondent Jacob Soboroff. He has exclusive access to the port of Long Beach, part of the country's largest port complex. Jacob, take it away.
Nicole, good afternoon to you. I'm out here in the middle of Long Beach Harbor with Mario Cordero, the CEO of the Port of Long Beach, along with the Port of Los Angeles, as you know, because I know you've talked to Mario quite a bit. It is the largest port complex by volume in the United States of America. It's critical to our nation's economy. And you use the word uncertainty. That's sort of the name of the game here right now. It is an extraordinary experience to be out here. You're looking at a drone shot as well that's flying live over us here on this Long Beach Harbor Patrol boat at the Port of Long Beach at a time when there should be multiple vessels here from China in order to bring those shipments in and get them out across the United States of America. And that's where we're going to start, Mario. How many boats are right now in Long Beach Harbor at the Port of Long Beach?
Well, right now, there's maybe about 3 or 4. I mean, you're looking at 2 major terminals here. We have at one terminal, 1 vessel, and another major terminal, we have 0. So we have 6 terminals, so right now it's very few vessels.
I think that the point that I want to stress with you and to our viewers is that just because we're in a 90-day pause, are we out of the woods yet?
No, I mean, progress is being made, for sure. On the other hand, if you're in a business sectors or a shipper, there's still a lot of uncertainty. What happens after 90 days? What happens on July 8th when the reciprocal tariffs on the other countries, that pause expires? So again, while there seems to be some light at the end of the tunnel, there's still uncertainty here, and here you can just view it for yourself here in this complex.
Nicole, what you're looking at on the left-hand side of your screen is an aerial picture of the Port of Long Beach. We're the little dot in the middle of it, and those cranes that are standing there should normally on a day like today, even in the times before this announcement, be humming basically with activity, Mario. Explain how it works. There's a cargo ship right there. That one comes, did you say, from Sweden?
No, it's a company based out of Sweden, but it comes from China.
Okay, so that one comes out of China. Normally what you'd be seeing on a ship like that is those kind of ships stacked up here in the port. What are those cranes normally doing at a time like this?
So normally you would have 3 vessels there operating day and night, so to speak. So those cranes would be moving.
Around the clock?
Essentially around the clock when you're talking about ship to shore.
I've heard you talk before about sort of the calculation, the equation that converts the number of cargo containers on a ship like this into American jobs. Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Absolutely. Like, for example, at the Port of Long Beach, there's about 2.7 million jobs that are directly or indirectly from these operations.
2.7 million jobs.
2.7 million. In the state of California, that is 1.1 million. So at the state level, if there's a 10% reduction in cargo, there's a 10% reduction in jobs. And at the state level, that's 100,000 jobs.
You might remember, Nicole, that during COVID, we were out here and we were talking about how there were ships stacked up. How many, Mario, out into the Pacific Ocean waiting to get in here?
That was 109 vessels back in the spring of 2021.
109 vessels, the size of the one that we're about to approach here, Nicole, in Long Beach Harbor, that were stacked up in the port because there was so much demand for product after this port shut down entirely that there weren't enough terminals to bring in the ships to get the cargo across the country in order to actually move that product across the United States. Is there a scenario, Mario, because things have been frozen here and throughout these 90 days that you're going to see a similar type of stacking, that this process will grind to a halt even though the tariffs have been removed?
We may not see a scenario like we saw in the spring of 2021. However, there is a surge coming because a lot of shippers were not bringing their cargo here to the West Coast from China because they didn't want to be subject to a 145% tax.
We're only going down now to a 30%. I say only. We're going down now to a 30% tariff. It was well above 100%. A 30% tariff. Mario, you're the CEO of this place. Will it continue to affect operations here even with that 30% tariff in place?
Well, I believe the 30% tariff will continue to have an impact. We're going to hope to see whether these discussions continue to be fruitful, so even to lower that percentage. But don't forget the tax on the export market going back to China, or U.S. products going to China. Right now, China went from 125% to 10%, but nevertheless, for a mid or small shipper, that's a big difference for them.
Has President Trump ever been here?
No.
I wonder if he was watching right now, what you would want President Trump to know about sort of the way things are going here, given the tariffs that he put into place, and your biggest worry about the next 90 days and beyond going forward.
Well, the biggest worry is that if we don't have resolution in terms of certainty, there's not going to be any products on the shelf. We're approaching peak season, which annually is anywhere between July and August, when the back-to-school products come, holiday season. So I think if the president comes to the complex today, he's going to see berth space that's empty. And again, you're witnessing here, ordinarily we'd have 3 vessels at this terminal. Right now we just have 1.
Berth space that's empty. That doesn't sound like a recipe for a humming American economy.
That's correct. I mean, the bottom line is 2/3 of our economy is based on consumer spending, and what comes in here is what consumers spend on.
Nicole, I can't tell you how striking it is to approach a ship like this. You understand the volume of trade that comes into this country every single day. How many stories tall is this, Mario?
Well, those vessels are huge. I mean, some of them are 3 sides in terms of length of a football field. In terms of height, the containers that are stacked up there, you see significant number. Like that, I think, might be a 12,000 TEU, which is a smaller vessel. Ordinarily you have 14.
That's a
16.
smaller vessel.
Right.
To watch these, Nicole, cargo containers unloaded in a process that's run by union labor, International Longshore Workers Union, it really is a spectacular thing to see. But to know how impacted this place is, how slow the operations are moving here. Earlier, Nicole, Mario called it a COVID-level event. Other than that, I don't think we've seen this place in a crisis of this magnitude, Nicole.
Jacob, I wonder if you could ask Mario. Last time I talked to him, he told us that through Long Beach Port, there are goods that go to every congressional district in this country. And I wonder if you can ask him if he has any sense of how many of the businesses in this country can endure the instability, whether it's a complete slowdown like you're seeing today or a complete surge like what is expected when the tariffs drop from 145 to 30?
Nicole, Mario can hear you. Go ahead, Mario.
So there's, Nicole, there's about 300 billion of cargo value that comes to this port. That gives you an indication of the magnitude of the cargo. In terms of the cargo, where it goes from here, as I indicated previously, every congressional district in the mainland has cargo from the Port of Long Beach. And I think the big concern is for the average shipper, which is a mid-size or a small shipper, they're taking the real hit with regard to the cost they put out in terms of their deposit to book the cargo and the cost that they're looking to pay the tax on that cargo.
Look, Nicole, if I could just jump in real quick, look at the size of this thing. And one of the things I want everybody at home to understand is the products that are on that ship are the products that enter all of our homes every single day. Mario, what are some of the things that you're talking about with Nicole that are going to be felt across the country? What are some of the products, the goods, the services that come through this port that are not going to make their way to these congressional districts across the country?
Well, as we prepare for the holiday season, I'm talking about the peak season, July, toys. 80% of the toys are manufactured in China and come through this port. So 20% of refrigerators that we have here in the USA come through this port, computers and so forth. So it's a significant number of consumer goods and durable goods in terms for business sectors. So the magnitude of what we see here is, again, enormous. And this is why you see here, you're in the largest container port gateway in the country.
President Trump now moving forward on a reported plan to get a giant gift for his administration, I guess personally, politically, but then ultimately for himself through his library. This is a plan to take not $1 million gift or a $10 million thing, but actually $400 million of value from a foreign government through the value of a jet. It is egregious. It is possibly illegal if Congress doesn't approve it. You might remember all that talk about the Constitution and the Emoluments Clause. But bottom line, there are also figures on the right who are concerned because, separate from the ethics and the obvious security implications, which we'll get to, this just looks really bad, greedy, thirsty even. So here's the plane. It's from the royal family of Qatar. It is a luxury Boeing 747 jumbo jet. The Trump administration says they would take this jet that you're seeing certain pictures of as a gift, and they would turn it into an Air Force One. And then they would keep it. So they'd use it for a few years. That's the plan that we have according to the reporting. But then Donald Trump would get it afterward as a private citizen. And the way they're finagling that is they say through his library, presidential library, but bottom line, if he's allowed to fly around on the $400 million jet from the foreign government and only gave it to him because he was president of your country, which is supposed to be a public interest position, well, it all looks pretty unseemly. There are questions here about national security, about the constitutional ban on gifts, which back in the day they called emoluments. The idea was, even then they knew that foreign governments with budgets and largesse could try to separate the leader of a country who's supposed to look out for the country, for you, separate that obligation from the leader's personal situation and throw a bunch of money or gifts at him, or him or her. So remember, the Emoluments Clause says Congress would have to approve this kind of thing. We are in Trump land, and they've been testing everything in the courts, but the concerns are piling up.
Mr. President, what do you say to people who view that luxury jet as a personal gift to you? Why not leave it behind?
You should be embarrassed asking that question. They're giving us a free jet. I could say, no, don't give us. I want to pay you $1 billion or 400 million or whatever it is. Or I could say, thank you very much.
You'll notice there's not much of a substantive addressing of the issues there. He just says, he redescribes that it's a gift. Of course, the larger the gift you get, the more in debt you are. Money in politics is strictly regulated, and politicians, including in the White House, who've gone down the road of taking too many gifts, have usually faced consequences. Long before Watergate, President Nixon was in so much trouble over taking what was then about $18,000 in gifts, not $400 million, that he had to give this address. You might recall it. They called it the Checkers speech. This was back in the early 50s. The dog that was also part of the gift was named Checkers, and he found a way, as politicians do, to get us talking then and now about checkers. I couldn't resist showing you that lovely historical dog. But the comparison is here, we're not talking about a few $1,000s, which then was big enough to be a scandal in a national address. We are talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that Donald Trump, you saw his response there, doesn't deny. He says he'll take it, he'll benefit from it, and how dare anyone be mad about it? Of course, the problem is if people are taking this level of gift, which some call graft, right, then the question is, what do you owe back? And is it a bribe if you give something back? The Attorney General says it's fine with her. The opposition party, the Democrats, call it flying grift and wildly illegal. That's a quote. Of course, whether this is illegal under the Constitution or other laws will have to be debated. One thing we haven't usually seen is any president try to do this. So I don't have a Supreme Court case to cite for you tonight about what happens if you take, I don't know, a jet. And if you could take one jet, can you take 5? Can they give jets to every member of the Trump family? MAGA leaders don't think this is good politics, that's for sure. Laura Loomer, who's been welcomed by President Trump during this new term to the White House, says this is a stain. And here is a very prominent conservative who's been very supportive of Trump in the campaign days, Ben Shapiro, weighing in.
Like, please define America first in a way that says you should take sacks of cash from the Qatari royals. Is it good for draining the swamp and getting things done? The answer is no, it isn't. It isn't. If you want President Trump to succeed, this kind of skeezy stuff needs to stop.
Quote, skeezy, that's the review, as they're sort of floating the story, from a very MAGA-friendly commentator there, Mr. Shapiro. So that's on the right. That's some of the reaction. Trump himself happens to be heading to the Middle East today, visiting Qatar, along with Saudi Arabia and the UAE. We should also note here the Trump Organization, which continues to run with a tie to not only Donald Trump, but his family members, is striking deals to the tune of billions, more than even one jet, across those very countries, as the Wall Street Journal reports. There is a lot more to this story, but those are the highlights and some of the legal background. And because it's a big breaking story, I want to get right in to our guest tonight, who is, I should say, one of the foremost experts in this space of ethics. Norm Eisen co-founded CREW, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, a nonpartisan group that has a stellar record of going after any such graft, conflicts of interest, no matter the party. He's a Brookings Senior Fellow. He was the ethics czar to President Obama. You could see them in the Oval Office. Richard Painter, a Republican ethics counterpart, recently said the Obama years were a high water mark of exactly avoiding these kind of conflicts, not even going near them. Thanks for being here, Norm.
Thanks for having me back, Ari.
Yes, sir. Before we get into all the details, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being you took a free drink at a mixer, it's under the legal gift limit, and 10 being one of the worst types of White House corruption issues you've ever seen. Where does this rank, first of all, just for folks who are trying to make sense of this?
11. This is the worst scandal. Not only Emoluments Force 1. We've learned a new term for emoluments. It was an 18th century term for anything of value to a president. Skeezy. Maybe they'll rewrite the Constitution with the skeezy clause, Ari. The plane is the tip of the iceberg, as your graphic just showed. The crypto conflicts are enormous as well, and also a vehicle for foreign governments to invest, with the UAE putting $2 billion into one of the Trump organizations, the World Financial Enterprise, that lists Donald Trump on its website. This is the worst corruption and conflict scandal that we've seen, and the plane just illustrates it.
So I'm about to talk about something I feel a little oogie talking about because it seems personal. But it turns out the reason I'm going to do it, the reason I feel okay about it, actually, is that it's explicitly not personal in the end. It's about the country. It's about policy. It's about the health of literally tens of millions of Americans. It does start in a kind of personal place. So, again, slight oog factor here, but work with me. Here it is. We have had on this show many times before former FDA Commissioner Dr. David Kessler. He's a big deal. He has served multiple presidents, Democrat and Republican. As I said, former commissioner of the FDA. He was most recently a very senior science advisor to President Biden. David Kessler has been the dean of the medical school at Yale and at UC San Francisco. David Kessler, as I say, a very big deal. And as a medical doctor, Dr. Kessler recently looked at the report from President Trump's own annual physical last month. And to him, that report told a story, a good news story, that he thought more Americans should know about. This is from a piece that Dr. Kessler wrote for The Atlantic. It has just published in the past few minutes. He says, quote, during his first term, a scan showed signs of plaque buildup in President Trump's coronary arteries, which put him at risk of a heart attack. In 2020, his BMI, his body mass index, was just over the threshold for obesity. That combination would have made him a candidate for a GLP-1 drug, that is a weight loss drug like Ozempic or Wegovy. Quote, and indeed, throughout his 2024 campaign, people speculated that he was taking one. Then, last month, Trump's latest physical showed that he had dropped 20 pounds, which moved him from obese to overweight. Trump has never publicly said he is on a GLP-1, and when reached for comment, the White House did not address questions about how the president lost the weight. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said Trump is, quote, in peak physical and mental condition. I'll tell you, we also reached out to the White House for comment. We got that exact same response about what a brilliant specimen of man he is. But Dr. Kessler goes on to say this, quote, the most revealing aspect of the president's medical report was the list of drugs he is taking, which includes a combination that amounts to what doctors call intensive lipid-lowering therapy, a treatment usually reserved for patients who are at significant risk of cardiac disease. That drug regimen seems to be working. His LDL, the bad cholesterol, has dropped dramatically in recent years. So what Dr. David Kessler says he sees in President Trump's medical report is a success story. Success against conditions that tens of millions of Americans struggle with, namely obesity and cardiac disease. And that success, that progress in the president's own health report appears to be largely thanks to medical science. The president is on these two cholesterol-lowering drugs, this intensive lipid-lowering therapy for people at risk of cardiac disease. That treatment really appears to be working for him. We do not know if the president's documented weight loss is thanks to Ozempic or Wegovy or any similar drug. Certainly no shame if it is. Any such drug is not listed in his medical report. The White House will not say one way or the other when they are asked. And I know I said this was a little oogie to talk about because this feels personal, but the point of this is not necessarily the president's personal health. The point here is that the president of the United States appears to be improving his own health through access to great medical care and great medical science. That's what he gets. Simultaneously, his administration is doing so much to hurt regular Americans' opportunity to achieve those same good health outcomes the same way. The National Institutes of Health, the government research agency that produces much of the science for these specific drugs and countless others, Trump has slashed its budget and nearly $2 billion in research grants there have been canceled. The FDA shepherds drugs to market and makes sure they are safe. The FDA is reeling from huge staffing cuts, and the staff that is there can't complete basic tasks because, among other things, their government credit cards have been frozen. Trump and his allies in Congress are currently debating how many hundreds of billions of dollars they're going to cut from Medicaid, which provides health insurance to tens of millions of Americans. And as for those GLP-1 weight loss drugs that can be a lifesaver for so many people, well, Trump has rescinded a Biden administration proposal to have those drugs covered by Medicare. Even as the White House says, maybe weight loss drugs will get a big price cut. They'll solve it with deals, if you want to believe that. But they're undoing the plan to have them covered by Medicare, which puts at risk the opportunity for tens of millions of Americans to benefit from those kinds of drugs. President Trump is personally benefiting in his own health from the scientific and medical infrastructure the U.S. government has built up over decades. He is simultaneously in the process of destroying that infrastructure for everyone else. Joining us now is former FDA Commissioner Dr. David Kessler. He has a new book that is coming out tomorrow. It's called Diet, Drugs, and Dopamine, the New Science of Achieving a Healthy Weight. Dr. David Kessler, congratulations on the book. First of all, let me say, I brought home the galley when I last saw you. I read it. My partner read it. We then handed it to a neighbor who also wanted to read it. I really appreciate you writing this, particularly given your expertise in this field and so many others. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Rachel.
So first, let me just ask you if I accurately represented your take on the president's medical report and why you think it's worth understanding in terms of how he is governing, how he is managing health policy in the country.
You know, weight is such a fraught subject. There's so much stigma attached to it, but it's not about weight. It's really about health. You got the facts exactly right. Let's just go through them. The president had a cardiac scan that showed some plaque buildup, and they put him on 2 lipid-lowering drugs. What no one has said about those 2 lipid-lowering drugs is what those are called is intensive lipid-lowering therapy, ezetimibe, rosuvastatin, and they're working. His lipids dropped dramatically from 143 to 51. I mean, that reduces the risk of heart attack. That prolongs life. But the key, as you said, is the science of those drugs was worked out by research funded by the NIH and shepherded by the FDA. The president is destroying those institutions that gave birth to the drugs that are benefiting him.
I think we tend to think of drug development as the province of private companies, of pharmaceutical companies. Can you explain to an audience that may not understand the sort of weight of what you just said? Can you talk about the federal government's role in researching and creating drugs and getting them to the American people, the part of it that can't happen without the U.S. government?
So a drug has to work on a certain target. And while the drug companies will chemically synthesize the drug and do the clinical trials, the identification of that target, the receptor, I mean, that was done by research funded. It was Nobel Prize winning work by Brown and Goldstein, right? They identified, you know, through NIH funding, because no drug company has that capability. They identified the receptors that the drugs can work on. It was also true for the current weight loss drugs. The GLP-1 drugs were done by, you know, a number of research labs, including, you know, a great research lab up at Harvard at Mass General Hospital.
When you were last here, Dr. Kessler, you said something that got a very large response from our audience. People continue to ask me about it. You talked about when President Trump himself had COVID during his first term, and he was very ill. We learned later just how seriously ill he was. And you talked about his treatment, a very successful treatment at Walter Reed when he received monoclonal antibody infusions. And you sort of broke the news on our show that the doctor who made it possible for Trump to get that treatment, which very well could have saved his life, is one of the officials at FDA, one of the officials in the federal government who Trump had fired. And it seems like it's following the sort of same lines that you're describing here today. Something which he's benefiting from, which may have indeed saved his life, is something that he's cutting off in terms of the ability for that expertise to continue to benefit not just himself, but the American people. I feel like I'm seeing continuities between those two stories, but I wanted to ask you if you see it that way.
I think you got it exactly. I was told this weekend that there's 700 recusals today at FDA. That means recusals, you have to submit those when you're looking for jobs. So there is an exodus. That kind of expertise, those nights that I was on with you when we were facing COVID, we got through those because I was able to rely, when I was co-leading Operation Warp Speed, on a great deal of expertise. And the Trump administration is going to need to rely on those expertise. They just haven't figured that out yet. There are going to be moments where they're going to turn around and find no one is there with that kind of expertise, and that should concern all of us.
Dr. David Kessler, former FDA commissioner and so much else, a long record of service in our government at the highest levels of our health infrastructure. Dr. Kessler's new book is out tomorrow. It's called Diet, Drugs, and Dopamine, The New Science of Achieving a Healthy Weight. Dr. Kessler, as always, it's an honor to have you here whenever you can be here. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you, Rachel.
We are coming back to you live with the news that many people have been waiting for 548 days. There is a convoy heading into the airbase in Israel as we wait for our first sign of Idan Alexander, the U.S. citizen who had been held hostage in Gaza, was released today by Hamas. He is obviously, we are told, back in Israeli territory. He was handed over just a short time ago from the Red Cross to the IDF. And obviously, there is a tremendous homecoming that is waiting for him, members of his family waiting, and people watching as well in his hometown in New Jersey. There are helicopters on the ground, presumably awaiting him to take him to Tel Aviv. But let me take it to NBC's Hala Garani. Hala, it seems like we could be very close now to this exceptional moment.
Absolutely, Chris, and his family will be relieved that he's made it out of Gaza. He was handed over to the Red Cross inside of the Gaza Strip, then driven out and handed to IDF forces, the Israeli military, and that's the convoy that you see driving toward a military base called Re'im in southern Israel. That's where he'll be reunited with his mother, his father, and other members of his family. There were photos that were put out by the Israeli authorities showing his mother preparing his clothing on a bed in what we believe is Re'im Air Base, or military base, I should say. After 584 days in captivity, he turned 20 and then 21 in Hamas detention and captivity. And this was the deal that led to his release was very unusual in the sense that it didn't involve the Israeli government. It was struck between the Trump administration and Hamas directly, bypassing the Israeli prime minister. And again, what you're seeing there on your screens are vehicles, one of which is transporting Idan Alexander. He'll be taken to that military base. He'll be assessed medically, and then he will be choppered, we presume, along with his family to Ichilov Hospital in Tel Aviv, not far from our position here. And we hope that we'll be able to see either video or at least still images of his reunion with his mother. You know, she's been interviewed over the last year and a half plus by NBC. I've interviewed her twice myself. She always tried to send a message to her son, telling him to, stay strong, that they were going to meet up. He was due to be released, in fact, Chris, March 1st. That's when phase 2 of the latest ceasefire deal was meant to begin. But then, of course, the ceasefire collapsed. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu restarted the war in the Gaza Strip. And that led to the cancellation, the postponement until today of the release of Idan Alexander, Chris.
All right, stand by for us. Let's look at the beginning of this convoy that we believe is holding Idan Alexander, 21 years old, born in Israel, but his parents moved to the U.S. When he was very young. He was raised in New Jersey, and he decided to wait to go to college and instead joined the Israeli Defense Forces, IDF. He was patrolling on a kibbutz near Gaza on October 7th when Hamas attacked. We've learned a lot about him. His family says he was an avid sports fan, loyal, great sense of humor. He, again, was previously expected to be released in March, but Hamas later said it had lost contact with the group holding him. Well, after unusual negotiations directly between the United States and Hamas, he appears to be just minutes potentially away from being reunited with his family. I want to go to Christopher O'Leary, former director of hostage recovery for the U.S. government, senior vice president of global operations at the Sufan Group. None of us can imagine what this must be like. There must be a point early on in the process, Christopher, when
you maybe don't even let yourself believe what might be happening. And then he's handed over to the IDF. And we should say that the commanders and soldiers of the IDF are celebrating today as well as we look at what's going on at Re'em military base. What are these minutes like and the time leading up to it?
Well, you don't know that the deal is done until he is in your custody, in your care. Just like what happened back in March, these things can fall apart at the last minute. You're dealing with a terrorist organization who are the individuals you're negotiating with for the release, claiming that they lost contact with the component that was holding them. So you don't know if that's true. You don't know if it's not. But until he was brought into the Red Cross's care and then turned over to the IDF, you really don't know if this is going to go through. But what does happen is all the planning to try to reintegrate the hostage and get them back to full health and their mental well-being the entire time. Other things that are being prepared, which are really not talked about as much, he will be debriefed by Israeli intelligence and military intelligence for tactical information that might lead to the location of other hostages, the identification of their guards. But then at some point down the line, he's also going to be interviewed by FBI agents because he is a victim of a crime, number one. Number two, he's also the witness of crimes against other U.S. victims. So if the FBI ever needs to pursue members of Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad for their crimes, his statements will be critical to building that case.
We are set on a shot in Tel Aviv, Israel, where he will be heading via helicopter. And this has been such a long, long, long wait. And Chris, you said you know the parents. I've interviewed any number of the hostage family members. And it is astonishing to me how they get up every day and put one foot in front of the other. And they don't just do that. We've watched family after family after family, including the Alexanders, advocate every day, going on TV, getting the word out when interest seemed to wane, trying to put that attention back on, pressuring members of Congress, trying to put pressure on the Israeli government. Having worked with them, how do they do it?
Well, the Alexanders, and they're incredible people, but they are a typical hostage family. What they endured is as devastating as what their son endured in many ways. Their son, his confines are terrible, but the conditions are somewhat set every day, and he'll become institutionalized. For the parents, it's the unknown. They don't know what's happening, and they have little control over things. But the Alexanders and many of the other parents in this current saga with Israel, they've been committed to trying to get in front of the White House and other key decision makers in the United States. Travel back over to Israel, do the same thing there, get to Qatar because they know the Qataris are invested in this as well. And I don't know if they've slept for a year and a half. But as I talked about earlier, the Alexanders have done this with real grace the entire time. And I don't know how they've stayed so composed because it would be the undoing of most people.
So I'm just getting word, Christopher, that Adnan Alexander has indeed arrived at the air base. So he will immediately go in with medical officials who are accompanying him right now and undergo an initial medical assessment and then be reunited with his family. It gave me chills to hear about his mother laying out his clothes that are waiting for him when he gets there. But when you talk about the other more formal things that will happen to him after that initial excitement, including the debriefing by the IDF, the conversations that the FBI will want to have, how much training would he have had as a member of Israeli Defense Forces to deal with a situation like this and the kind of information that he might have been able to collect even under these most extreme and unimaginable conditions?
Well, I think it's important to remember he's an IDF soldier, right? So, many in the U.S. just point back to the fact that, just 2 years ago, he was a high school student and a kid. He's no longer a kid. He's a soldier in one of the most competent militaries in the world. And he's had a certain level of training, even though he was very junior, to be able to stay composed in very difficult situations. And his ability to endure and survive this is only, indicative of the fact that he has the mental and physical capacity to do things that many others can't. So, he will certainly have been collecting information on who his guards are, maybe what units the guards are part of, conversations they've had, locations he's been moved to, and frankly, because that is his daily routine. And every soldier or Marine or sailor or airman or woman gets training in these kinds of things, certainly in the United States, but in the IDF as well. So he's been conditioned to collect some of these things. But even if he was just an average citizen, he's a witness to things. And with the right people debriefing him, you can elicit information out of those conversations. But it won't be a normal debriefing, at least the way we do it in the United States. We'll have a victim advocate with him to help guide those conversations and to make sure he's psychologically prepared to go back through some of these difficult journeys.